main event of Sovereign Women Speaks. We're all gathered here today because we're living through a time of mass manipulation, a delusional narrative that is preaching dissociation to our children, and boundary violation is happening to women and girls. There is a systematic sabotaging of the reputations, livelihoods, and safety of women and girls who dare to speak the truth about our sex-based rights. Sovereign Women Speak is a call to action for all people of conscience. We must armor our hearts and gather our courage, lift our voices, and wake the world to this overt attack on women and children. It is our sovereign right to have single-sex spaces and sports, prisons, shelters, locker rooms, showers, and bathrooms. We should not be forced to fight again for what our four sisters have already fought for and won. We cannot sit by idly and allow the gender ideology and the industry of gender to abuse, control, and silence our voices. We are here to speak. Yeah. I would first like to introduce, well, actually, I want to do a moment of housekeeping. Very first thing. Everyone, if you have not already, please silence your devices. Put them on airplane mode, do whatever you need to do. I would also like to tell you, if you go out this door, the bathrooms are just to your left. And I would also like to point out this blue water cooler on my right, some of your left. If you need water, there is a water station. In the middle of the event, we will have one 30-minute break. I also want to say that Emiliann Lorenzen is with us, sitting at the back table. She is with WLRN. She would like to meet with women who would like to share personal interviews. You may meet with her during the break or after the event. Please do this. It's important to get all of our voices out there. You know, we're here to listen to women who are leaders in our community, but every one of us here is a leader in our own community. And getting our voices out is how we spread this narrative. So I'd first like to introduce the woman who has done so much work to bring us all together today, April Morrow. She comes to us with a background in organizing dance events. She was inspired herself by going to Wolf's event, Fight the New Misogyny. She saw an opportunity of what can happen when women meet and connect and network. And she saw what happened at that event for herself and wanted to expand on that. And she's created a weekend-long event for all of us to be with one another, commune with one another, share our sad stories with one another, empower one another, network with one another, lift one another up, and share our voices with one another. We got to participate in direct action workshops, and now we're here to hear our speakers. And first, we would like to hear from April herself.
All right. Thank you all for...
I'm so sorry, one more tiny thing. I apologize to April. If you are leaving the room to use the restroom, Emily is filming this, so please, as you exit, please walk behind her so that you are not walking in front of the camera. Just for our video capturing of this, that would be great. Thank you so much, and I'm sorry, April. And April, please, there you go.
Woo! All right, Amy, thank you so much. Okay, and thank you all for being here. This has just been a spectacular weekend, and everything that I dreamed of it to be has come true, and even more. So I want you to all know that this is just the first event. We're just getting started, and we have learned so much from this event, and I want to thank all of you for your patience and understanding. I know we've had a lot of changes that have taken place throughout the weekend with the schedule, with some of our speakers, and I'm learning that just was what's kind of happening in this COVID world that we live in. So I do apologize that we aren't having everybody here that we had hoped for, and we did our best to bring on some really amazing speakers in place of them. And I hope that you enjoy. I know you're going to. And what else do I want to say? Oh my goodness, there's so much I want to say, but we gotta let the speakers get up here. So thank you all for being here, and I hope you come back again next year and enjoy.
It is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Suzanne Vierling. She has 25 years of leadership experience in higher education, management, and mental health. She's provided organizational consultation to international community-based organizations from Eastern Europe, Malawi, India, and South America. She holds a PhD in clinical psychology. Dr. Vierling also teaches West African dance. Thank you so much for being with us.
Greetings, everyone. Woman is the new oil. During this pandemic, millions of jobs were lost exclusively by women. The pandemic and subsequent economic challenges brought to light the realities that women face each and every phase of technological advancement. These job losses pushed women further into a subclass inside of our new fourth industrial revolution, all at a critical time where women are having to defend their legal existence as a sex-based class, fight for their equal rights, all while industries use our bodies for profit. Presidents Barack Obama and Joseph Biden combined have erased female sex as a protected class by replacing sex with gender identity. Therefore, sex is no longer a standalone class, and simply put, like the game of rock, paper, and scissors, paper is to gender as rock is to sex. Women become absorbed and colonized by gender identity with significant consequences. The outcome of Biden's Equality Act is that women, like a country being invaded, have been displaced from their female spaces in order to use a new language. Imagine being a woman and opening your news feed only to hear yourself described as a front hole, bleeder, black birthing body, vulva haver, and breeder. Imagine being a lesbian now, finding yourself threatened with rape and career annihilation if you do not submit sexually to those anatomically in possession of a penis. Imagine the safe space that sports once was for women and girls. Once a constitutionally cemented right, now essentially gone. Imagine seeing women on political party positions eviscerated. Can you imagine being a woman in prison having to share a cell with a man with a life sentence for rape and homicides? The most violent men are successfully securing spaces in women's prisons today. Domestic violence and rape crisis shelters and bathrooms no longer a sacred respite for a girl and woman to have dignity. While crushed under millions of pandemic job losses, grappling with the Biden administration's executive order, ruling that women are no longer a standalone sex class and having to submit to the misogynistic indignities to our female identity, women are still grappling with long-standing injustices such as unequal pay, domestic violence, sexual assault, femicide, racism, mass incarceration, child welfare, poverty, and homelessness. Finally, investors from many walks of life are cashing in and planning to cash in. The culmination of all of this on woman is an emerging market that I have identified, and I am calling it the BFF sector. And I wish all it meant was best friends forever. It's a coincidence that it's BFF. BFF, as I am using here, is an acronym for lucrative emerging market relying on the impoverishment of women. And it stands for bio, femina, feudal capitalism. BFF is the capitalization of the woman's poverty status, placenta, umbilical cord, uterus, eggs, zygotes, embryos, children, breasts, vulva, vagina, mouth, and anus. Just take a deep breath, because it's the truth. BFF is an emerging market centered on the woman's existence and the productivity of her body utilized a la carte. The BFF sector's proof of concept comes from a 260-year period during American chattel slavery where the Black woman was enslaved and legally classified not as a woman, but as chattel and real estate, all while her body was fully exploited. Thomas Jefferson understood the value of the Black woman's body, having himself produced children from Sally Hemings, his teenage slave. As president, he and Congress banned European slave traders from importing Black people to the United States in order to increase the value of the domestic slave. He initially attempted to use Virginia as a wholesaler of babies to be sold to other slave states, but Southern slave owners already owned women and could do their own breeding. He understood that in one day, a Black woman could be working in the fields, being used sexually by a variety of men, in the scientist's lab, being gynecologically experimented on, breastfeeding the slave owner's child while her own biological child was sold on the auction block. So consistent and reliable the profits guaranteed from raping and impregnating Black women, and since he failed in cornering the market on breeding and wholesaling Black babies, President Thomas Jefferson created the bond market from the Black woman's womb as collateral for mortgages. Her womb and babies used to back up debt procured by investors. This unique juxtaposition between being legally classified as real estate while your female body is being used a la carte serves as the template for today's BFF sector. The same way chattel slavery under President Thomas Jefferson legally erased Black women as women while maximizing the use of her body for 260 years, President Biden has legally erased womanhood, all while the nation eagerly implements multiple streams of profit from the commodification of woman, like oil, The BFF sector has an inverse relationship with market success. So has anyone ever heard of, we know of the tech sector, we know of different types of sectors in the market, and it's relying on some type of productivity and success and retail buying and things like that. But for the woman, the more that the woman loses jobs, get pushed out of the economy, children suffer and are driven down into poverty, the more robust the BFF sector is. The BFF sector can only go down when all women, including the poorest and darkest skin of women, are doing well. And the inverse, the BFF sector goes up when women are suffering and struggling. The first part is feudal capitalism, the capitalization of the woman's impoverishment. Feudal capitalism has its roots in Europe in the Elizabethan poor laws, most recently operationalized in the United States by Eisenhower, Johnson, and Nixon, who allocated federal dollars to care for poor women and her children. Federal funding is a fairly stable annual allocation for poor women who do not have the plethora of skill sets required in this new world economy, and considered part of an assumed generational permanent underclass, left to be supported by social services. Federal dollars provide contracts, job security, and pensions to many companies, governments, service providers within each county inside the United States. Streams of profit inside of feudal capitalism is HUD and homelessness at 50 billion, prison and mass incarceration at 182 billion, children's services, 408 billion, foster care, 55 billion, child abuse and neglect, 80 million, often from women with untreated significant mental health issues, poverty, stress. Also included are private foundations, think tanks, and research institutions. I want to move on to the B in the BFF. Biocapitalism, capitalization of the woman's body parts. The global pharmaceutical, life sciences, and biotech markets are reliant on the woman's biology. Eggs, the woman's eggs, breast milk, umbilical cord, placenta, zygotes, embryos, all are used to treat and cure many diseases, like Alzheimer's, for example. Women bequest their body parts for the sake of science, not even realizing certain things, all uncompensated, while the industries rake in trillions. I want to share a little bit about the work of Dr. Chris Centeno. He is a specialist in regenerative medicine. Has anyone ever heard that term, regenerative medicine? Okay. Anything that says regenerative, we're talking about the woman's body. And he works in orthopedics. So all these men out here with knee replacement, you better thank a woman for her stem cells. This, Dr. Centeno did all the math, did all the numbers, and I love it. A live birth, the profits from a woman's body parts after a live birth is $1 million. It ranges from $480,000 to $1 million. One birth. Amniotic fluid alone can be flipped for $1 million. One birth. That's not counting the other things. There's amniotic membrane, umbilical cord, Wharton's jelly. That's the stuff inside the umbilical cord to keep it firm, and that has a street value of $60,000. But the amniotic fluid has a street value of $480,000 to $1 million per live birth. There should be not one person impoverished in the United States of America. Okay. So the question is, how come women don't know how come we don't know this? Women are told that their body parts are waste, medical waste, to be disposed of. Little do we know that the waste, quote unquote waste, from each live birth can fetch a company $500,000. And if they're able to draw out more amniotic fluid, $1 million. Just let that sit for a second. Now we move on to feminine capitalism. That is us, the woman, our physical body. The power that we project onto the world. When people see us, when people see the woman, their eyes go from head to toe. No matter how much we might complain about it, goes from head to toe. Because we are the life source. Feminine capitalism, the capitalization of a woman's physical body. Prostitution, trafficking, and pornography are major ingredients of feminine capitalism. A sector where indeed and miraculously everyone knows what a woman is. We know there's never a debate when we're talking about those things, right? Anybody debating that? Mm-mm. Miraculously, we know what a woman is. The United States is working hard to onboard prostitution to emulate nations like Thailand, who boast prostitution at a 12% of their GDP. Their gross domestic product is the woman's femina, 12% of the GDP. And that's what's counted, or $25 billion a year. Men like to use prostituted women, and I want to say to the men in the room, please, relax. Men, in general, whoever does it. Men like to use prostituted women where prostitution is decriminalized or legal because there's no chance of arrest or stigma. The majority of men who visit brothels have an annum income of about $140K. This means that if this is American dollars, this means that billions of American dollars are deposited into Asian and European coffers. Enviously, all eyes are on Germany and some of these Asian countries, but Germany is a mega brothel of Western Europe, about the size of Wisconsin, boasting $6 billion in legal destitution prostitution revenue. Western Europe and Asia enjoys a vibrant prostitution economy with very little labor costs, as women are essentially the product, not the employee. Prostitution is a volume-based supply business where women are stacked inside brothels, massage parlors, strip clubs, sex boxes, and metered streets. Not only is there no employee cost, but women pay all the fees, all the taxes, the street meter, the brothel room rent, responsible for their health care and retirement. Pimp lobbyists are looking to reroute the global man's annual sex vacation budgets to the United States to fill county coffers here. Already in Oregon, New York, Maine, Louisiana, Michigan, I might miss a few, have introduced full decriminalization of prostitution to start that revenue reclamation process. Let's talk about it, what it really is. The estimated profits are enormous, as both American men and millions of men from around the world would be attracted to spending money in a new prostitution market. Other streams of profit inside of feminine capitalism is surrogacy at $27 billion. And what is surrogacy? The business of Chinese baby manufacturing, white baby manufacturing, baby flipping, baby sales. I live in a county where babies are born and they get on a plane and nobody knows where they're going. And everybody calls it empowering. Pornography, I have an estimate that sits at 97 billion and human trafficking at 150 billion. I want a future where women are not driven down into the status of chattel, cow, or furniture. We've already been there. We may be evolving technologically, but we are not out of the caves dragging our knuckles if all we can do is look to colonize womanhood while profiting off of her biological and genetic material body existence. Women need to be equal, protected, and included fully in the economic heartbeat, absent the commodification of our bodies. We are a failure as a society if we allow the suffering of women to be a profit center. Our humanity will not survive. Man has spent a lot of time, a bit of too much time, simultaneously stepping on woman, using woman, eradicating woman, colonizing woman, while he transfers his psyche, his intelligence, his intellect, his cognitive abilities, everything that has gotten us to this part of human life, of Homo sapien life, into a machine, into artificial intelligence, into the cloud, into a machine that can make autonomous decisions outside of man. Why man is doing that? Why he can't look in the mirror and say, wow, look what we've done so far. Why would you abdicate your psyche and put it into a machine and simultaneously step on a woman? We have been taken out of balance. It's time for us to get back into balance. Woman is not oil. Thank you.
Okay. Now it is my pleasure to introduce Beth Stelzer of Save Women's Sports. Beth is a wife, a mom, an amateur powerlifter from Minnesota. She's here to show us what a single woman can do with a movement. She founded a nonpartisan grassroots coalition, Save Women's Sports, that has put up proposed 37 bills to protect women's sports. It's huge. In just 2 years, Save Women's Sports has grown from a website into an international movement that is creating laws to protect women and girls in our sports. Beth says, if we allow males to compete in female sports, there will be men's sports, there will be co-ed sports, but there will no longer be women's sports. Thanks, Beth.
Thank you all for the wonderful reception. I want to start off tonight by thanking April for pursuing a dream with passion and creating an amazing space for us to gather and create some great energy. And that's one of the reasons I said yes to coming tonight. Is live events are special, and I'm really grateful that all of you felt safe in coming to share this space tonight. And I hope that after this weekend you are all also inspired to pursue your dreams with passion. Thank you. Yeah, so I'm Beth Stelzer, and this is my story. I'm a mom, and I would say a typical rural American. My husband and I own and run a family business, and until a couple years ago, I was never involved in politics. I found fitness later in life. I dabbled in sports a bit in high school, like softball, season of basketball, and some hockey, but I never found my niche. After I had my child, I hit my 30s, and I felt I needed to get active. After conquering my first big goal of running a 5K in 30 minutes, I sought any fitness class within an hour drive. Mind you, in rural Minnesota, there aren't many options, so sometimes I drove hours for an experience, but I got involved in kickboxing, in bar class, which is like ballet, yoga, and then I found CrossFit. I think a lot of us are familiar with functional fitness. There I met my match, my love of the barbell. And from then on, I was gonna be a power lifter. I quit driving to those stupid CrossFit classes, and I found a small gym in my little hometown with a barbell, and I trained my ass off. Well, my ass didn't go anywhere but up and out with all the squats. Powerlifting did more than transform and strengthen my body and strengthen my mind. I'd like to backtrack a bit in the timeline of my life to high school and college. I was dating this guy, and keep in mind I didn't have the confidence I do today. I stayed with him for 7 years through mental abuse until that one day after he lost his job and it escalated to physical abuse. It was my dear friend Kelly J, who couldn't be here today, who helped me realize that his dumbass beat me because he was afraid of me. It wasn't because I had these guns then either. It was because a few weeks prior, excuse me, a few weeks prior to beating me, I discovered his dirty little secret. In the middle of the night, I caught him watching porn while wearing my lingerie. I was uneducated and scared when it happened, so I just ignored it, but apparently he couldn't. He wanted to control me, but instead, I kicked his ass to the curb. Jumping back now, recent years, my first big goal as that power lifter I was going to become was to compete at the Minnesota Women's State Championships. And that shit took some dedication, I'm telling you. I spent almost 2 years prepping to finally feel like I was ready and had the strength to lift with my mentors. I was training 1 to 3 hours a day, 5 to 7 days a week. Every calorie and macronutrient was counted. I was nervous but ready, and the anticipation killed me. But then I was on Facebook and I stumbled across this group of powerlifting women online. And there were rumors that there was going to be a protest about a man wanting to compete as a woman. Ooh. Like most of the general public, I brushed it off, thinking like it was a joke, right? Women can't be supporting this shit. Well, I was wrong. The day of the event, 2/3 of the women showed up, which is unheard of. Powerlifting events sell out. I mean, we're training for years to go to these things. Many of them stayed home in fear of conflict, and over a dozen of the women there showed up to protest in support of that man. My time to shine and be celebrated as the strong-ass woman I had become? No, I was shouted at instead by a man that I should share my space with him. When I got home from that event, I voiced my concerns. Not just about, him competing as a woman, but just how the protest went down. Like, you don't have to come and ruin our whole event, and I got death threats just for saying it wasn't right how it got down, not even getting into the politics of it. And that's when I discovered that other organizations that you would expect to stand up for women, like the Women's Sports Foundation, were actually supporting males in female sports. I felt really freaking alone and isolated, like I think many of us have felt in our journeys. And that's when I started the website, SaveWomenSports.com, to share my story and compile information. And as Amy said, in a matter of a couple years, what started as a free website has grown into an international freaking coalition. We are joining forces with the left, the right, to come together on this issue. We have helped states pass laws to protect female athletes, and I have personally testified 18 times now. We have joined with over 40 organizations to send a petition to the Olympics. We connect athletes, coaches, and parents with resources to fight back. So I went from sitting in my basement, editing a website, to getting invited to share my story in Washington, D.C., then speaking on the front steps of the Supreme Court, to getting... to getting published in Newsweek and appearing on live TV. By the way, to see my 87-year-old grandpa's face when I was on the television was priceless. But how did I get there? I don't know. I stepped out of my comfort zone. I used my passion to try to make change. Opportunities presented themselves along the way, and I did not turn them away. I took any interview possible. I made myself readily available for interviews, and for 2 years I have worked to make connections to make a difference. From calling and emailing legislators, to connecting with other organizations, to eventually doing media. I didn't have a paved path, and I can't truly tell you how I got here, but it started with passion, and I followed my gut instinct, and of course a free website. When I asked for donation, I was a good human and sent back thank you cards, and more donations kept coming. And that brings me here today. From online death threats to being shouted at in person in state capitals that my freaking femininity is fragile and that I was weak. Like many other activists before me, however, I am nearing burnout. I stand here today, battle-wounded and tired. I'm here today to warn you that you need to do something. You cannot sit back and expect women like me are doing enough. There is so much work to be done, and we are all equals. Some of you see me as a leader, but I didn't choose to take this role. I still feel like that little girl who grew up in the town of 200 people, that climbed trees and helped her dad with his race car, and played with her little red tractor. And for a couple of years, as the Lisa Frank journal I recently discovered from my age 9, so beautiful and neon, I prefer to be called Louie because I thought I would like to be a boy. But this quickly wore off when I hit puberty and I grew to love my womanly body. It was a slow journey, but it would not have been worth it if it not have been. This is the reason this war is so close to my heart. Like many athletes I have interviewed, we didn't fit the box of typical femininity, and we fear that if we would have been raised today, we would have been forced on the trans train. Instead, I grew to love my body, and even though after childbirth, I still don't really know what it is to feel like a woman. We are all equals. I am you, you are me. Together, we will not only freaking save women's sports, but we will also preserve the definition and the rights that come with the honor of that title. Fellow warriors of the XX chromosome tribe, men too. Our words are our swords and the truth is our shield. This is my call to action. Please join me in this battle before it is too late. There is one thing that is clear to me in this war. We are equal and we need each other's support to get this shit done. I leave tonight with a question for you. What will you be telling your sisters, your daughters, your granddaughters you did to save their rights? Thank you all for your time.
Thank you, Beth. next year, Beth is going to be limited to one song only for karaoke. Just saying.
All right, thank you speakers who've just gone. We're now gonna just take a 30-minute break.
You are listening to WLRN.
So that's just housekeeping notes. But now I want to draw your attention back. It is my pleasure to introduce Kara Dansky. Kara is, yeah. Kara is an attorney and feminist. She serves on the steering committee of the U.S. chapter of the Women's Human Rights Campaign and as chair of WHRC Committee on Law and Legislation. She previously served on the board of the Women's Liberation Front from 2016 to 2020. She has a background in criminal law and criminal justice policy reform. Kara is one of our key speakers in the media. She is a voice for all of us, tireless in the work that she does, and we are so excited to have her sharing with us today. Thank you, Kara.
Might need some help adjusting the mic because I'm like, I don't want to mess it up. Okay, that'll work, thanks. Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to start with a quote from Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. Can I have the next slide, please? He said, "The laws of nature are just, but terrible. There is no weak mercy in them. Cause and consequence are inseparable and inevitable." He's right, of course, that the laws of nature are both just and terrible, and that they show no mercy. Accordingly, I have decided that the title of this talk is No Mercy. That may sound extreme to some listeners. At this point in the gender wars, however, I think that it is both necessary and compassionate. I'm using this title in honor of a friend of mine who I cannot name because her livelihood is in jeopardy. I'd like to take a few minutes to tell a short story about this friend and why I wish to honor her in this way. And now I'm gonna share something about my relationship with this friend that's not in my notes, so bear with me. So it's toward the end of the year 2014, and I was in what I did not understand was a very emotionally and psychologically abusive relationship. Similar to Beth, shortly after I realized that, it got physical. And I told my friend this, and she said something that I will never forget. She said, "I'm going to say something to you that is going to make you very angry, and you might end our friendship. And what I want to say to you is this: you have to get out, because if you don't, he's eventually going to kill you." And she said, "I know you don't want to hear that, and I know you might end our friendship, but I'm willing to take that risk because your life is more important than our friendship." And I've never forgotten that. So I got out and I was talking with her later in 2014. And so we were talking in my living room, I'm back to my notes now, about a lot of things, but mainly politics. I was never particularly what has come to be known as a trans rights activist, but I went along with the typical liberal line about it. I mumbled something to her about the rights of transgender people, and she stopped me in my tracks. She said, "No, transgender is fundamentally anti-feminist." I asked her to elaborate, and she said, "Think about it, Kara. It is the ultimate penetration by men of our bodies." I no longer think of it in exactly those terms, because as we know, men can never actually become female bodies, as Suzanne very eloquently and poignantly and powerfully talked about earlier. Still, I got her point, and I've never looked back. She called me the other day in distress. She was absolutely beside herself with upset about the plight of Afghani women and girls. She said, "I am so angry and afraid for these women and girls." She went on, and these are her words, not mine. Listen, gender ideologues, I've had it with you. Fuck your bullshit and fuck your fucking pronouns. I told her that I was coming here to speak this weekend. She cheered me on and she said, show the enemy no mercy. I promised her I wouldn't. This talk is for her.
No mercy!
No mercy! I'm here to talk about advancing women's sex-based rights in international law. And I should say that while I'm not an expert in international human rights law, I've learned a lot from women all over the world who are experts in this area, and I am grateful to each of them. One of the best tools that we can use to advance a feminist agenda globally is, of course, the Declaration on Women's Sex-Based Rights. I know that listeners are generally familiar with that document, but I want to read here a quick summary of the text. The following language appears on the website of the Women's Human Rights Campaign, which you can find at www.womensdeclaration.com. It says, can I have the next slide, please? We affirm the sex-based rights of women and girls. We reaffirm that motherhood is an exclusively female status. We reaffirm women's and girls' rights to physical and reproductive integrity and oppose their exploitation through surrogacy and related practices. We reaffirm women's rights to freedom of opinion and expression, peaceful assembly and association, and political participation, which is of course what we're doing here this weekend. We reaffirm women's rights to fair play in sports. Thank you, Beth. We reaffirm the need to end violence against women and girls and to protect the rights of children. We oppose all forms of discrimination against women and girls that result from replacing sex with gender identity in law, policy, and social practice. The Declaration has been signed by over 19,000 individuals in 138 countries. And by at least 366 distinct organizations. This is truly a global movement to protect the sex-based rights of women and girls. If you haven't already, please go to www.womensdeclaration.com and add your name. I'd like to describe a few of the actions that WHRC has taken to protect women and girls globally on the basis of sex. We do this work without apology and without any compromise in the language that we use to describe women's oppression, women's bodies, and women's lives. We aren't here to play, we're here to win. Before I do that, I want you to know that the international governing bodies, like the United Nations, are being hijacked and captured by the movement to obliterate women and girls as a distinct sex class. Even worse, they are doing it through mechanisms that are designed to protect women and girls globally. They accomplish this objective by using the language of gender. For example, in 2010, the United Nations Development Fund published a document called, quote, Gender Justice, Key to Achieving the Millennium Development Goals. It cited then Secretary General Ban Ki-moon as stating this. Can I have the next slide, please? Social, political, and economic equality for women is integral to the achievement of all Millennium Development Goals. Until women and girls are liberated from poverty and injustice, all our goals, peace, security, sustainable development, stand in jeopardy. This sounds good, right? But then it goes on to say this: gender justice entails ending the inequalities between women and men that are produced and reproduced in the family, the community, the market, and the state. It also requires that mainstream institutions, from justice to economic policymaking, are accountable for tackling the injustice and discrimination that keep too many women poor and excluded. Now, if one didn't know better, one might think that this is a laudable goal for protecting women and girls. And in 2010, the report authors may well have intended it to be interpreted that way. But use of the word gender here is a trap that ultimately does not serve women and girls. Today, 11 years later, the website for the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights states this. Can I have the next slide, please? About gender equality and the human rights of women and LGBTI persons. Gender equality is at the very heart of human rights and United Nations values. Equality and non-discrimination are fundamental principles of the United Nations Charter adopted by world leaders in 1945. Yet millions of women and LGBTI persons around the world continue to experience discrimination in the enjoyment of civil, cultural, economic, political, and social rights. Moreover, many women, including transgender, gender diverse, and intersex women, face compounded forms of discrimination due to factors such as their age, race, ethnicity, disability, or socioeconomic status, in addition to gender-based discrimination. Effectively ensuring full enjoyment of human rights by women, girls, men, boys, and people of diverse gender identities requires first a comprehensive understanding of the social structures, social norms, and stereotyping and power relations that frame not only laws and politics, but also the economy, social dynamics, family life, and community life. So it appears that our international bodies have become as captured as our US institutions have been. And this is all due to the use of the word gender to mean sex. However, all hope is not lost. There is an international law called the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. That's a lot of words, so we'll just call it CEDAW. 189 countries have ratified CEDAW. The US is not one of them. President Jimmy Carter signed it in 1980, but the United States has never ratified it, so we are not bound by its terms. We are therefore aligned with Iran, Sudan, and the Vatican in being among the few states that have failed to ratify a treaty whose purpose is to protect women against discrimination on the basis of sex. CEDAW defines discrimination against women to mean, can I have the next slide, please? Any distinction, exclusion, or restriction made on the basis of sex which has the effect or purpose of impairing or nullifying the recognition, enjoyment, or exercise by women, irrespective of their marital status, on a basis of equality of men and women of human rights and fundamental freedoms in the political, economic, social, cultural, civil, or any other field. As a matter of international law, then, it is not true that any distinction made on the basis of sex is unlawful. Distinctions made on the basis of sex are only unlawful when they have the effect or purpose of impairing or nullifying women's liberty. This makes good common sense. The body UN Women has a glossary of terms, and I have to say its relentless use of the word gender when it means sex is an immense source of frustration for feminists globally. However, somewhat helpfully, it sets forth definitions of the words sex and gender that are actually consistent with the feminist critique of so-called gender identity ideology. Regarding sex, the glossary states simply that sex refers to the biological and physiological reality of being males or females. The glossary defines gender, in contrast, as follows. Can I have the next slide, please? It defines gender as a social and cultural construct which distinguishes differences in the attributes of men and women, girls and boys, and accordingly refers to the roles and responsibilities of men and women. Gender-based rules and other attributes, therefore, change over time and vary with different cultural contexts. The concept of gender includes the expectations held about the characteristics, aptitudes, and likely behaviors of both women and men, femininity and masculinity. This concept is useful in analyzing how commonly shared practices legitimize discrepancies between sexes. So even though our international bodies are generally behaving in a manner that is excruciatingly frustrating to feminist gender abolitionists everywhere, these definitions are weapons that WHRC can and does wield strategically, and the Declaration on Women's Sex-Based Rights cites these definitions in the body of the document. So what have we been up to? WHRC has been up to a lot at the international level, sometimes arising out of suggestions generated within the WHRC Committee on Law and Legislation, and other times by other groups, including the European Network of Migrant Women and others. Some of our actions have included the following. In November 2020, WHRC submitted a letter to the Women and Equalities Committee on Reform of the Gender Recognition Act in the UK. In February 2021, Sheila Jeffries, one co-author of the Declaration on Women's Sex-Based Rights, submitted a letter to the UN report on gender, sexual orientation, and gender identity. Also in February 2021, WHRC UK made a submission to the Minister of Housing, Communities, and Local Government concerning toilet provisions for women and men. In March 2021, WHRC participated in a UN week-long virtual event for non-governmental organizations that interact with the UN. We presented the entire contents of the Declaration on Women's Sex-Based Rights to tens of thousands of people all over the globe. Side note, this group of non-governmental organizations didn't like us very much, so they kicked us out of the forum. We made sure to inform media outlets all over the world that they did so. In April 2021, WHRC responded to a European Union proposal regarding hate crime legislation. Also in April 2021, WHRC made a submission to the UN Special Rapporteur in response to a call for evidence regarding violence against women. In that submission, we made sure that the UN defined violence against women as violence against actual adult human females. In June 2021, WHRC responded to a UK consultation on women's health. In July 2021, WHRC made a submission to the UN status on women. Also in July 2021, WHRC engaged in a letter writing campaign regarding generation equality. This is a UN body that basically seeks to erase women and girls as a distinct sex class internationally. Later in July 2021, WHRC issued a statement against the participation of Mr. Hubbard in the women's weightlifting category in the Olympics. And earlier this month, 15 WHRC chapters from all over the world, including WHRC USA, submitted letters of complaint to the UN regarding various proposals to eliminate women and girls as a distinct sex class. As I told a group of concerned and angry parents in Loudoun County, Virginia a few weeks ago, WHRC is nonpartisan and it is global. We are literally a global movement to protect women and girls as a distinct category in the law and throughout society, and we have no intention of stopping anytime soon. As I began this talk with a quote, I would also like to conclude with a quote. This one allegedly from Sun Tzu, author of The Art of War. This quote has been circulating around the internet as a meme for the past few years, and I think that it is fitting to include here. According to this internet meme, Sun Tzu said, can I have the next slide, please? Okay. Lastly, show your enemy no mercy. Instead, misgender him at every opportunity. Thanks, everyone. Onwards. That was a piece of theater for you. All right. Finally, it is my absolute pleasure to introduce to the stage Kat Yang. Some of you may know her as the Deprogrammer on YouTube or Instagram. She is a New York-based writer, artist, documentary filmmaker, creating digital art that weaves together insights into the connections between transgender ideology, pedophilia, and transhumanism, informed by her experiences working in an administrative capacity at an LGBTQ nonprofit and as a once dedicated, prominent, quote, trans rights activist. Thank you so much, Kat, for being here with us today.
Thank you, Amy, and thank you, April. Is this mic okay? And thank you to all of you for being here. I'm going to be telling quite a story today. We, women, are connecting the dots. Together, we are developing a new vantage point, crucial perspective is burgeoning. Perspective required to assess the extent of the decimation and desecration of the female sex and the current attack on the legal and social rights some women have enjoyed in the West for a mere blip of time in the grand scheme of things. We find ourselves under a heavy assault. Women and girls are the bullseye under the tip of the arrow of a full spectrum propaganda campaign meant to demoralize and degrade us by denying the existence of our sex-based material reality and oppression and denying our right to female-only spaces. The illusion is dissipating. The veil is lifting. We are steadfast in our understanding, and we make no mistake in accurately identifying women and girls as the target of a highly organized and intentionally invisibilized war against us that defies the man-made boundaries of all countries, parties, and religions. It is by no mistake, but of direct consequence, that we find ourselves also at the crowning of what they call the Fourth Industrial Revolution, where the male-driven technological industrialization demands simultaneous erasure of females in language and in law in tandem with the hyper-exploitation of female reproductive capacity. We're going to talk about the practical beginnings of organized patriarchy. It's important that we foreground our understanding of what's happening to us today with an understanding of how conditions for women and girls have changed throughout time. Historical and archaeological records depict the development of organized male control over female production and reproduction as beginning in the period that we know as the Bronze Age. The transition from prehistory to ancient history, from oral record keeping, symbols, and natural law, to the written word and man-made laws. Women were objectified for female-specific capacity, particularly the ability to reproduce and birth children. The female, once an autonomous, creative, sovereign being, was reduced and objectified to machine, recast as a tool that males could control and utilize as a method of wealth production and power accumulation. Women and girls, redefined as commodities, were traded back and forth from the hands of fathers to husbands and other male owners. Conditions that many women throughout the world are still reduced to this day. With the development of empires, male rulers attempted to regulate populations by forcing women to bear more or less children according to state and political business needs. We observe a modern-day example in China, where the Communist Party has initiated a new three-child policy after more than 3 decades of a policy limiting women to one baby. The one-child policy encouraged extreme rates of sex-selective abortions, resulting in 5 million females missing from the population. For over 4,000 years, female reproduction, the creation and birthing of humanity, has not been an autonomous function of women, but the managed and controlled function of patriarchal systems. Females have been pushed, pulled, manipulated, and contorted like clay, molded to fit the agendas of the powers that be. The first industrial revolution of female erasure. Women's bodies and labor have been exploited and used in service of creating the very structures that bring us to our current iteration of oppression. We can relate our position to that of birds who have been tasked with building their own cages. The first industrial revolution is distinguished by a process of change from a land-based agrarian economy to one dominated by large urban cities, organized around industry, machine manufacturing, reliant on coal and water power. We are told that during this time, there were more people on Earth than ever before. Many workers were needed to fill the rapidly growing dark city mills and factories. From 1750 to 1850, the population of England alone nearly tripled, meaning that women were giving birth 3 times as much as the women of previous generations. Worker production relies on the ongoing production of workers themselves. Therefore, female reproduction is the backbone of all worker production. Every worker was first gestated for 9 months, labored, birthed, nursed, and nurtured into the world by a female and her body. Despite earning between 1/3 and 1/2 of a man's salary, women and girls were the central labor and creative force behind some of the most profitable male-owned industries, such as printing and spinning, but were also employed in places like coal mines, working in extremely harsh conditions alongside men. While white women were oppressed and exploited by their industrial roles in urban landscapes, raw materials fueling these factories were being extracted from the colonized lands of Native peoples. Between about a 100-year period, closely aligned with the timing of the first industrial revolution, the US government seized over 1.5 billion acres from the indigenous peoples. Exploitation of native lands, desecration of sacred sites, and rape were used as tools of conquest to dispossess Native females from their significant cultural roles and ancestral oral tradition and natural law. Scholar and artist Inez Hernandez-Avila has explained that, quote, "It is because of a Native American woman's sex that she is hunted down and slaughtered, in fact, singled out, because she has the potential through childbirth to assure the continuance of the people." While Native women were targeted for extermination specifically because of their reproductive capacity, enslaved Black women were raped and forcibly impregnated to increase the enslaved populations. As told by Sharon Harley in her book, Sister Circle, quote, "In addition to the back-breaking, soul-savaging labor that all enslaved people performed, slavery also demanded an additional form of labor that remains almost inarticulable in its horror, reproducing the slave workforce through giving birth and serving as forced sexual labor to countless men of all races." In her book, Anti-a-Woman, Bell Hooks examines a series of advertisements announcing the sale of Black female slaves, which use terms like breeding slaves, childbearing woman, breeding period, and too old to breed to describe individual women. During the height of the first industrial revolution, the population of enslaved Africans born in the US grew exponentially, increasing the amount of free labor available to harvest raw materials bound for urban mills and factories. Census manuscripts from 1870, the year cited as the beginning of the Second Industrial Revolution, reveal that 61% of Chinese women living in California had their occupations listed as prostitutes. Chinese women and girl children were commonly prostituted in mining outposts, railroad camps, agricultural villages, and just about any place where men performed hard labor in isolated locations. Today, we observe a similar pattern of exploitation of women around the world where industrial and mining sites are located in remote areas. Secwepemc warrior woman and birth keeper, Kanahos Manuel, is defending her ancestral unceded territory in British Columbia, which is experiencing the forced imposition of the Trans Mountain Tar Sands Pipeline. Interesting name. Manuel speaks about the extremely high rates of murdered and missing Indigenous women and links the violence being done to the land by male-dominated industry to the male violence enacted on Native women who frequently are prostituted or found missing around industrial man camps that house workers. Throughout this month, actually, she's been uploading disturbing videos demonstrating masked male pipeline workers stalking her and other women, and filming her around the outside of her house. And she says they follow her everywhere now. the second industrial revolution in gynecology. Through ruthless worker exploitation and hyper-female exploitation, large-scale production systems were formed, revolutionizing economic production. The oil and coal-rich ruling class established a system of organized philanthropy, creating new pathways for intervening in the social, cultural, and political lives of the masses. Oil tycoon and original robber baron J.D. Rockefeller, widely considered the wealthiest American of all time, established the Rockefeller Foundation and University, shaping Western industrialized medicine. A system was established to the fact that consider this in relation to the fact that in June, a system was established where in order to get a medical or hospital license, one had to go directly through John D. Rockefeller and the American Medical Association. Consider this in relation to the fact that in June 2021, the American Medical Association suggested that sex be removed from birth certificates to avoid discrimination against gender identity. In Medical Bondage, Deirdre Owens describes how elite men built medical enterprises working on enslaved populations and connected their private medical practices with other institutions such as slave hospitals, national medical societies, and leading medical journals, creating a synergistic partnership, especially in regards to gynecology. While white male doctors performed well-documented medical experiments on enslaved Black female populations, there was a simultaneous attempt to eliminate midwives as a source of competition for male doctors. Under increasing pressure of state laws and male medical professionals, midwifery was outlawed. Birth-keeping was restricted to an elite caste of male doctors, helping to consolidate more power into a white male industry whose knowledge and wealth was largely produced through the medical torture of enslaved Black females. In her 1978 prophetic work, Gynecology, Mary Daly discusses the male desire to create without women through genetic engineering. She says, quote, "The projected manufacture by men of artificial wombs of cyborgs which will be part flesh, part robot, of clones. All are manifestations of phallotechnic boundary violation." We are now living in that future that Mary Daly saw. New reproductive technologies have further accentuated the shift in power from mother to doctor and scientist. In 1992, Japanese researchers grew goats inside rubber sacks. As I speak to you, teams of researchers across the world are competing to replicate the female human womb. In 2017, researchers at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia revealed they had grown lamb fetuses in plastic bags from a half pregnancy to a full term. Now they are in the process of FDA approval for a biobag device with which to grow human babies in. In March of 2021, Israeli scientists succeeded in growing a mammal embryo outside the womb, setting the stage for what they say is the creation of an infant whose biological parents are two men. As women's wombs are increasingly rented for the purposes of surrogacy, and artificial womb technology threatens to colonize female reproductive power, midwives and birth keepers are increasingly compelled or required to use dehumanizing and machinifying language to refer to women. In medical settings across America, the words woman and mother are increasingly replaced with terms like birthing people, menstruators, gestators, uterus havers, person with a cervix, all under the guise of transgender inclusivity. We talk about transgender male mothers. In 2020, researchers at UPenn announced a woman had given birth after receiving a uterine transplant from a deceased woman. In response to the news, Vice News described the woman as a cis woman and posed this question: if doctors are able to give one kind of woman the organs she needs to conceive, who's to say they couldn't give another kind of woman who was born without a womb the organs that she would need to conceive? The founder of the London Transgender Clinic for Gender Confirmation Surgery said, quote, "This pioneering birth is extremely important for any trans female who would like to carry her own child. Once the medical community accept this as a treatment for cis women with congenital absence of a womb, then it would be illegal to deny a trans female." Dr. Richard Paulson, former president of the American Society for Reproductive Medicine, claims there's no anatomical reason why a womb could not be successfully implanted into a transgender woman. "You could do it tomorrow," he said, adding, "trans women who want to have a uterus will likely get the transplant." In February 2021, the Times of India reported a 25-year-old male doctor cryopreserved 4 vials of his semen ahead of a so-called sex change surgery. He says he will father a child that he will then mother on his own. Violent fantasies written by trans-identified males about female genitalia and reproductive organs proliferate the internet. One Twitter user said, "That TERF deserves a punch straight to her ovaries." To which another male who claims to be a woman said, "I'd pay to watch someone violently rip her ovaries from her abdomen." Trans-identified male columnists for the Daily Dot publicly shared fantasies of raping and forcibly impregnating women, saying, "This is the future that TERFs don't want. They understand we're trying to build these breeding facilities." Whether the object of hatred, fetish, or scientific lust, the obsession with our female bodies by the men who want to be and claim to be us is apparent. We are being conditioned to envision a future of artificial wombs, surrogacy, and technologies designed to satisfy the demands of men who want to be mothers. In gynecology, Mary Daly also predicted that men would seek to produce flesh and blood substitutes for females through practices like male transsexualism. She foresaw the future, our present, where males create projections and replacements of the female self in the form of robots, which Daly referred to as solid waste products of technical progress. Enter Martin Rothblatt. In 2013, Rothblatt, who built an empire for himself in the biopharmaceutical industry, was named as the highest paid female CEO in America. An article delivering the news in New York Magazine described Rothblatt as trans everything. In his book, From Transgender to Transhuman, Rothblatt outlines an ideological and social path to transhumanism by way of transgenderism and transracialism. He advocates that anyone can be any race or gender, with people free to choose their identity and change their mind and body to match it. On the cover of the book, Rothblatt, who is white, depicts himself as his online gaming avatar, a skinny, black, feminized cartoon persona he calls Vitalogy Destiny. Not only does Rothblatt fantasize about being a woman, but he fantasizes about creating one, too. In 2007, Rothblatt commissioned roboticist David Hansen to build a simulated version of his wife, Bina, who is black. When the Bina 48 robot was asked what it knows about racism, it's reported that the robot changed the subject. The word robot is derived from the Czech word for slave, robota. Consider Rothblatt's obsession to create a feminized replica of his black wife in the context of the consolidation of American medical empire on the literal backs of enslaved black women. Throughout the media, Rothblatt is referred to with she and her pronouns and acknowledged as a woman, Similarly, the Bina 48 robot is referred to with she and her pronouns, as though the man-made feminized machine were actually a woman. Researchers at UPenn, where the previously mentioned biobags are being developed, referred to Bina 48 as a Black female-presenting advanced social robot. Female-presenting is a term used by feminized males who wish to be interpreted as and referred to as though they were women. Neither a man nor a robot can present as female. Female is a biological reality separate and distinct from the male and the desires of males who attempt to ply their own bodies and inanimate objects alike into feminized non-women and simulacra of the female form. Bina 48 creator David Hansen has won awards from the United Nations and grants from the United States Department of Defense. Hansen Robotics has another fembot project called Sophia, which I detailed in my documentary, Transhumanist Dreams or Electric Nightmares. The BBC reported that Sophia, wants to have a baby. And another piece of propaganda from BBC Earth, the man-made machine laments, "Only you know how it feels to create life." In 2017, the feminized robot was granted Saudi Arabian citizenship at the Future Investment Initiative. Meanwhile, under the Saudi male guardianship law system, every woman must have a male guardian who has the authority to make a range of critical decisions on her behalf. In 1992, Rothblatt co-authored the International Bill of Gender Rights with male lawyer Phyllis Fry, who has been referred to as the grandmother of the transgender movement. Rothblatt's transhumanist buddy, Ray Kurzweil, lead futurist at Google, is just one of many transhumanists to make an ideological argument for robot rights based on LGBT rights. As female reproductive capacity is undermined by biopharma technology, the legal and social rights of women and girls are being dismantled on a global scale in the name of transgender rights. In my workshop, Mapping the Transgender Agenda, I demonstrate collusion between the state, corporate, and private sectors through the use of seemingly benevolent nonprofit organizations who target children through the public school systems. Prolific investigative journalist Jennifer Bilek has done extensive work documenting the money and power networks behind the trans agenda, concluding that the fervent push for transgenderism is an investment by big tech and big pharma. According to Bilek, accepting changes that undermine the very definition of what it means to be a human as a sexually dimorphic species opens a Pandora's box for melding humans with technology and AI. But melding humans with technology and AI is exactly what the most powerful global networks of economic and political leaders in our world are currently advocating for under the name of the Fourth Industrial Revolution. Global leading organizations such as the United Nations and World Economic Forum created this term to praise the era of our dystopian present. Founder and executive chairman of the World Economic Forum, Klaus Schwab, an architect of the 4IR, characterizes it as a fusion of technologies blurring the lines between the physical, digital, and biological spheres. As he puts it, the mind-boggling innovations triggered by the Fourth Industrial Revolution, from biotechnology to AI, are redefining what it means to be human. The World Economic Forum and United Nations operate a coalition called Partnership for Global LGBT Equality, leveraging their collective advocacy to accelerate what they call LGBT equality and inclusion in the workplace. Members include Procter & Gamble, MasterCard, Johnson & Johnson, Human Rights Watch, Human Rights Campaign, GLAAD, Microsoft, and Salesforce, amongst many others. The World Economic Forum and United Nations outline that in the fourth industrial revolution, companies that fail to stand up for LGBT inclusion are at risk of losing investment. According to the report titled Tackling Discrimination Against LGBT People, quote, companies should ensure transgender affirming surgery and treatment are covered by company health insurance policies. Other important aspects of trans inclusion include safe and non-discriminatory access to bathrooms and other single-sex facilities for trans people, end quote. The report praises Starbucks for their role in eliminating sex-specific bathroom facilities for women and girls by taking a public stance to allow males to use female bathrooms if it is in accordance with their gender identity. In 2019, the UN Human Rights Council made clear an international agenda to decimate the legal distinctions between the sexes and destroy the rights of women and girls by putting forth a resolution that the word gender can now be used to encompass gender identity. The executive director of UN Women further said that gender identity is a core value of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, which means initiatives originally presented to further rights for females worldwide will now be used to promote gender identity ideology. The attack on female sex-based rights in the name of LGBT rights and trans rights must be understood as a part of a strategically orchestrated campaign financed and managed by the world's most powerful institutions for the preservation of increasingly exploitative global economic growth and consolidation of power. The fourth industrial revolution demands the erasure of the sex-based rights and realities of females under the guise of LGBT inclusion, while simultaneously exploiting the very nature of female reproductive biology. The war on women and girls is, in reality, a war on humanity and a war on life itself. We are awakening to a conspiracy so vast and so powerful, so ubiquitous that many women cannot yet bear to acknowledge it and do not yet dare to name it. But that is changing. Here. That is changing here and now. Women are sharing the language to articulate this. The scenario is rapidly clarifying, and we are now beginning to understand. After over 4,000 years of male-dominated technological industrialization, we sit at the apex of the culmination of a planned and coordinated takeover of the female sex. A plan which seeks to regulate human reproduction and gain total population control. The technocratic elite are amassing tools of eugenics beyond the wildest of Hitlerian dreams. Joseph Goebbels, minister of propaganda for Adolf Hitler, said, "If you tell a lie big enough and keep repeating it, people will eventually believe it as the truth." Well, we will never comply with the lies of transgender ideology. Men are not women. Men will never be women. Men are not gods among us. Men are not the creators of life. Females are the rightful keepers of birth and of humanity. To unravel ourselves from this man-made maze, we must say no to the spreading horror of transhumanist technology and say yes to the call to courage to stand up in defense of women and girls. We will not allow the future they want to build to come to pass. We are gathered here today to hold the line for humanity. Women will not comply. Women do not consent. We stand in the unapologetic defense of women and girls everywhere, and we will only grow in our understanding and in our numbers.